Hello everyone, Stefan Hartmann here, Iron Direct Primary Care, bringing you my lecture on how to fix GERD, also known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, naturally. We're going to start out with a case study. Patient O. Over the weekend he was drinking alcohol and went for some Mediterranean food, which was spicy, and while eating he noticed a burn. So he went to the urgent care, where he was told to take Tums and esomeprazole. He took 2 esomeprazole that morning, had Chipotle, and the spice did not agree with him despite the acid blockers. Let's talk about some common causes for GERD. Low stomach acidity, too much gas, parasites, hiatal hernia, pregnancy, obesity, tight-fitting clothing, wrong posture, large meals of bad food, cigarette smoking, medications, H. pylori. I don't know about the too much exercise part. Magnesium deficiency and low chloride, pretty much agree with all of these. Little screenshot there. Alcohol-induced parietal cell damage, that's a huge one. That's the cells inside the stomach. Caffeine, NSAIDs, so ibuprofen, aspirin. These are all pretty common reasons for GERD. Less likely, H. pylori, pretty common though in some parts of the world, and in the US as well. Always has to be ruled out. And you can test for that as well, stool and breath testing. Patient O's diet, alcohol, lots of it, so that was probably his reason for it. His diet was pretty poor as well. Cornflakes, eggs, sardines, pretty good though on that part. Hot chocolate. I think the biggest problem would be his cornflake and processed milk. I'm not a huge fan of those. He didn't do any caffeine though, but alcohol, that was his issue. We talk about another patient, Jay. His symptoms were trouble breathing at night. The lung specialist gave him the diagnosis of asthma and inhalers. Didn't help. So he went to the GI specialist. They did an endoscopy. They made the diagnosis of GERD and gave him pantoprazole for 1 month. It was negative for H. pylori, so they did test him for that. He did have a positive hiatal hernia. Very interesting. He was giving some probiotics, told to eat nothing sour, nothing spicy. Agree with those. Interestingly enough, he has allergies to grasses and wheat and gluten and rye. He also did a sleep apnea test, which was negative. So he got a lot of testing done, this patient. So what does Jay's diet consist of? Flohsamen, so he's a German patient. Psyllium is basically like a fiber. Hafer, so oats, more fiber. He eats like noodle, pizza, bread, cheese. He eats some meat. And again, he has the hay fevers. His whole life, he drank a lot of Coca-Cola and ate poorly. He had severe acne as a teen and needed Accutane. There's a lot of reasons why then he might have this acid reflux issue, asthma issue, and hiatal hernia. So what happened to O and J? Patient O stopped drinking so much alcohol and it improved and resolved. He is young, so he went back to drinking, but make sure not to combine that with NSAIDs. Patient J was prescribed the steroid inhaler and his symptoms improved. He's also young, so it's possible his cough was related to the asthma rather than the hiatal hernia. So let's talk about this a bit more. So the first thing is dietary interventions. We'd want to avoid immune-triggering foods. So this would be the wheat, the pizza, the bread, the beer. No vegetable oils. We don't like to use those. Some olive oil is okay, but I would never cook with it. It immediately turns rancid, and this would never sit with anyone's stomach very well. I would use animal fat to cook. I would advise using some fermented foods, maybe some apple cider vinegar in the morning to improve the stomach acidity. Animal-based, non-processed food diet. And this is all assuming he doesn't have an ulcer, which they didn't have because they did the endoscopy. But let's talk about what can make a hiatal hernia worse. Well, poor breathing. I believe that the hiatal hernia is an epidemic in the US and most of the world. And it's because we're not using our diaphragm. Diaphragm is this muscle. We can control it this way. But I believe this is atrophied in a lot of people. So like any muscle, if it's thin and atrophied, it gets weak and you can get a hernia. Now what happens here, you can see in this diagram, this is the stomach pushing through the diaphragm. And it can get twisted and pinched off. And this is a really common reason for people to have acid reflux. Now, a lot of surgeons, they don't repair this unless it's very bad. And it's not a standard of care to repair hiatal hernias for the incidence of GERD. So this leads us to what are we supposed to do about this then? My theory is that we can improve it like any other muscle in our body. We can strengthen the diaphragm. So one technique I've looked into is Wim Hof breathing techniques. Flowability is another technique that can be utilized. So we would strengthen the diaphragm with breathing exercises if the surgeon cannot repair it for us, which, obviously we should try to repair it through strengthening exercises anyway before surgery. Another reason for acid reflux is H. pylori. This is a parasite infection of the stomach, and it causes ulcerations in the stomach. And it's a very painful condition, and it can also lead to stomach cancer if not treated. So how do we treat H. pylori? Unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly antibiotic resistant, and the treatment with conventional medicines is it has a lot of risk to it, right? So it's called triple or quadruple therapy. So it's acid blocking medications and several different antibiotics. A lot of people don't tolerate it, and it does have risk to it. I have been looking into alternative treatments, and one I've come across is the Biocidin BioCleanse. I do use protocols with Biocidin in my clinic at Iron DBC, and we're trying that for some patients here to try to treat H. pylori. But also these treatments, they also treat bacterial overgrowth in the stomach, not in the stomach, in the intestines, SIFO, SIBO, these sort of things. So a lot of reasons to use that. Well, let's talk about other reasons for ulcers, and it is very well known that stress can induce ulcers. And one of the most popular ways in the scientific literature looking at inducing ulcers is in the mice population. So they stress these mice or rats out, and then they give them ulcers. So we know that stress can cause an ulcer. BPC 157. I have been looking at this novel peptide. I wouldn't call it really novel. It's been around for many, many years, perhaps a couple decades. But it just hasn't become mainstream medicine, I believe, because it's a natural substance found in the human body. So very difficult to patent this, and pharmaceutical companies can't make money off of this. But it is a peptide that compounding pharmacies have, and I am associated with a couple of these compounding pharmacies. And we can use this in an oral therapy for patients with ulcers to heal ulcers and heal inflammation in the gut. So very cool peptide here. It has a low risk, but again, it is mostly experimental because there have not been very large human trials on this. Most of it is in, again, the rat model of study. Proton pump inhibitors. Now, this is the conventional method of treating ulcers. I would say treating, but it doesn't really treat the ulcer. It just reduces stomach acidity, so increases the pH. Unfortunately, it has a lot of risk to this. Fracture being one of the biggest ones. Breaking the bone. Yes, large bone fractures associated with proton pump inhibitors. We need stomach acidity, right? We have it there to protect us, to help us digest foods. So does it really make sense to block the acid for the lifetime of a patient? In my opinion, it doesn't make much sense, and I see a lot of harm in this. Let's look at a chart here and see if we can find the human pH on this chart and where it compares to other animals. Let's go to the next slide here. This one's a little bit easier to read. So the gray falcon stomach acidity is 1.8, the bald eagle stomach acidity is 1.3, and the healthy human stomach acidity is 1.3. Very interesting. Are we really that strong? I don't think we're as strong as the bald eagle. Let me see. Humans 1.5. Okay, I need to correct that. But still very, very strong for our stomach to have evolved this way. Let's look at the hippo stomach acidity, 4.4. Elephant stomach acidity, 3.3. The standard American diet human stomach acid on omeprazole, 4.02. And I've seen as high as 6.0. So we can disrupt our natural God-given stomach acidity with these PPIs. And this is concerning to me. Why would we want to do this? This is not natural. This is not our natural state. We're more like the bald eagle and the falcon, which eat carrion, which is raw meat, than we are the hippo and the elephant. So something's wrong here. Let's talk about the cycle of harm with PPIs, and this is my theory. The PPI, it turns the stomach acidity down to that of the herbivore, so from 1.5 to 4.4. You can no longer properly digest meats, amino acids. This leads to poor nutrition. Pathogens can pass into your gut, take up residence in the form of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and small intestinal fungal overgrowth. This causes leaky gut syndrome. This leaky gut syndrome leads to chronic inflammation, depression, autoimmune diseases, and this leads to further medical and surgical interventions. And this is a cycle of harm that I witness every day when I work in medicine. So, you've tried the pantoprazole and other PPIs and want to get off this substance. This is dangerous. Well, we talked about BPC 157. We talked about fixing the infections. Then we want to improve stomach acidity, not reduce it. So one supplement we can do is hydrochloric acid. This is a pretty cheap and affordable acid medication that we can take to improve our stomach acidity. Ginger is another interesting one. It's a very well-known Chinese medicine herb that helps with improving digestive juices. Water and electrolytes, so making sure we have the right electrolytes in the first place to make stomach acidity, right? We need chloride, we need sodium. I would also advise not consuming a lot of water before your meal. That's very conventional American practice to drink a bunch of water, cold water, before your meal. But what does this do? It dilutes your stomach acidity, right? It just makes sense. You drink a bunch of water, it's going to make your stomach acidity not as strong. And when your stomach acidity is not as strong, you're not able to digest your nutrients. You're not able to digest your meal as well. So personally, I don't drink a bunch of water before my meal. I think maybe a little sip, and throughout my meal I drink very little because I wanted to digest well. Improve the gut microbiome. We talked about the biocidin protocol. We can also start implementing fermented veggies, fermented drinks like kefir. I'm a huge fan of kefir. I drink this regularly. Obviously, it is a raw kefir, not a pasteurized kefir. Conclusion, alcohol, NSAID, soda, heavy caffeine, all induce stomach lining damage. We want to be aware of this. We need to try to heal this. So this takes time to heal. We avoid spicy foods. In my clinic, we use BPC 157 protocols. We use biocidin protocols to try to help heal the injury and heal the underlying infection. We don't recommend using PPIs long term. Sure, they can help with the short term if you're in a really bad pain, but I would not use these long term. Once you're healed of the ulcer, we want to improve stomach acidity. So this means HCl, this means getting the right electrolyte mixes into the diet, and this means not drinking a bunch of water before your meal. And this also involves improving the diet, getting away from the standard American diet that probably induced this problem in the first place. Ginger may help. If you have a hiatal hernia, you should probably get this diagnosed if you suspect it. There's a couple ways to diagnose it, x-rays, CAT scans, and obviously the endoscopy, which not a huge fan of. That does have risk to it. But the point is, a lot of people have a weakened diaphragm. Most people do. It's from low exercise capacity and thus low breathing capacity, and not learning how to control a muscle inside our abdomen in the first place. And obviously, if we don't use a muscle, it's going to get weak. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, kind of a different opinion on GERD. It's a huge issue. I consider GERD like basically an epidemic. It's from the standard American diet. It's from a weak diaphragm. And yes, it is from infections, SIFO, SIBO, and H. pylori. And treating with omeprazoles long-term isn't a solution. It causes a lot of problems. Fractures being probably the biggest and most well-recognized conventional reason to be aware of PPIs. So, thanks for watching.